This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to continue talking about things in reality on a multiplicity of levels, which the only way you can describe it is to say that these things are attacking us. And I'm talking about individuals, organizations, and then things in the biological realm, things in terms of EMF waves and 5G, things in terms of chemtrails, things in terms of mass mind control, things in terms of genetically modified organisms. Now, I was thinking and meditating and pondering as part of research and as part of obeying Proverbs. You know, if you seek after wisdom, if you cry out for wisdom with everything in you, then God will give you wisdom and guidance and knowledge. But if you're going to be passive about the acquisition of knowledge, and knowledge brings power, if you're going to be kind of tepid or lukewarm about it, well, it's simply, then you're going to move into the law of reciprocity. As you sow, so shall you reap. If you don't have a thirst for knowledge and wisdom and guidance, if you don't pursue it with like everything you have, and that doesn't mean you have to leave your full-time job to pursue knowledge, but if you don't have a very powerful drive to be wise, to gain knowledge, well, you already know the answer to that. Guess what? You're not going to have knowledge. You're not going to have guidance. You're not going to have wisdom. You're not going to have the kind of understanding that God promises us in the book of Proverbs if we meet certain conditions. So what does that mean? What it means is the average person, period, in America or any other country, a huge percentage of people who would be part of the average person, they have no hunger for knowledge. And therefore, they are not wise people. And they're not knowledgeable people. And they're not people that can give you guidance because they've never received guidance. And tragically, most tragically, despite the fact that this constant call from God to us to acquire wisdom, to pursue wisdom like precious gold, jewels, rubies, like something of infinite value, despite God's constant appeal to us as his people to be highly aggressive in our pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, the fact of the matter is that only a relatively small percentage of God's people have a hunger and thirst for wisdom. And you say, well, how can I say that? I can sit down and talk to somebody in 15 minutes, and so can you, and get a real good read about where they are and what they know. And if all they do is in the conversation communicate to me in what I call a narrow bandwidth, and when we're dealing with radio frequencies, etc., when the bandwidth is very narrow, it can only contain a certain transmission of information because the bandwidth is not big enough to encompass a great deal of information. So narrow bandwidth means a very narrow, tiny, in-the-box series of thinking processes where you basically just accept, consciously or unconsciously, you simply absorb like a sponge. You know what the people that I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to be insulting, have the brains and the minds and unfortunately the personalities of a sponge. Now, a sponge, as we all know when we clean the kitchen, you spill something or whatever, and then you place the sponge on top of the watery mess. And the sponge will just soak up and absorb indiscriminately whatever that watery mess is. The sponge will not critically think. The sponge will absorb bleach and Clorox just as quickly as it'll absorb water. The sponge is completely non-discriminatory. It doesn't value anything. It just sucks up whatever happens to be on the floor or on a kitchen surface or whatever. So, God didn't create his people to be sponges. And then sponges require, if you're covering a large surface, you have to go over certain areas, and then you got to squeeze the sponge out, and then you start the process over again. And again, the sponge is non-discriminatory. It doesn't evaluate anything. It just sucks up whatever the liquid is into the sponge. Now, God did not create his people to be sponge brains. What's that kids' TV show? It was a big TV show when my kids were kids. I don't even know if it's on the air. What was it? SpongeBob SquarePants, something like that. Obviously, I've never watched it. I mean, why would I watch SpongeBob SquarePants? For crying out. But I knew a lot of adults who watched SpongeBob SquarePants. Well, good for them. I have X amount of time during the day, and I'm not saying you can't relax and watch even dumb things. I'm not saying you can't do that. But what I am saying is I have X amount of hours a day, and God wants us to be balanced and healthy. So we're to rest properly, we're to we need time to relax, we need time to socialize, time to unwind, as well as time for working and research and all the rest of the stuff. That's a balanced life. But, it's tragic when I talk to, and I really do not like the fact that when in the communication of truth that I have to put down my fellow brothers and sisters. I don't consider myself one bit better than them. I really don't. I'm a sinner saved by grace. They're sinners saved by grace. And I don't feel one iota more spiritual than them or anything like that. And you may think, well, he's just saying that. No, I mean it. That's not how I feel. You know why? Because if you're a human being, which hopefully we all are, and we are, we're created in the image of God. If we're a human being, and we have some kind of friends or family structure around us, or co-workers or whatever, well, guess what? Unless you've engineered your life, and some people do engineer their lives, unless you've engineered your life to deliberately isolate yourself, barricade yourself from regular people like family, friends, neighbors, or if you're in the ministry, people that you're supposed to be serving. The attitude of a minister is you're a servant. You're not looking to be served, you're coming to serve. And that, if that mentality is not in a minister, that minister is incapable of ministering. Because how can you minister when your example is Jesus Christ? And Jesus Christ came to lay his life down for us. That's the ultimate act of service. There was a time when the statement, there were various statements that were said publicly that I'm a government servant. That used to be not a cliche, not just a phony word. It used to be that was the attitude that was expected of a government employee, whether on the low level, the high level, medium level, all the way to the top. They were supposed to have a mentality of being a servant of the people, not to be like a servant, not to be like a king. But do you see that? No, I see like arrogance that is off the Richter scale. in the hearings of the intelligence agencies, the heads of the intelligence agencies, you know, you didn't really have to know all the facts. I mean, it's helpful to know them, but you really didn't have to know all the facts, the statistics, the data, the timing, the dossiers involved in this whole Russian, so-called Russian collusion delusion, where they basically were attempting to impeach Trump, and they came up with no proof of Russian collusion after, an incredible amount of time and money. You didn't have to know all the specifics. You simply, and this is something that's lost on the American people because they have been deliberately, scientifically dumbed down. Their perception, their ability to perceive the obvious. And by obvious, I mean, when I was a kid, people everywhere had the ability to look in someone's face, not in terms of being judgmental, but the countenance, what was in the eyes and stuff. It's not like a perfect science, but people had the ability generally when I was a kid to look at another person and perceive with their senses, their visual sense, hearing, the tone of voice, etc. And you could get a read on whether a person was good or evil or what kind of character they had. Could they be trusted? Could they not be trusted? My mother taught me how to do that. My mother wasn't a psychic or anything. She was an atheist, but she taught me as a young boy how to read faces. And when it wasn't some weird thing, she'd just point. We'd go into a bank, and the bank, back then, the bank guy would try to take advantage of her because she was a woman. And he made the assumption that a woman was stupid. My mother was stupid. Well, my mother was not stupid. She was smart, as smart as you could be. And she took no prisoners. If a male tried to do the thing that they did when I was a child, try to pressure a woman or deceive a woman in a business transaction, she'd nail him. And then she'd point out, I could see it in his eyes, blah, 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 and she explained it to him. So that ability to access perception has stayed with me my whole life, and for many of you, it's stayed with you for your whole life. But that act of common sense is really lacking in the American public, and now it's all substance. Excuse me, I wish it was substance. It's all image. It's all the razzle-dazzle, but it's not the content. So as long as a presidential candidate or whoever smiles, acts compassionate, acts loving, has charisma, and of course now good looks is essential for leadership. It didn't used to be like that. I mean, good looks never hurt, but it was not as important now. And so you have so many deceivers that have been in the office of president because they had charm. And they knew how to manipulate the people with phony smiles and all the rest of that stuff. And they won the presidency on that. We've had a whole succession of presidents in my lifetime who have gotten into office not based on their real abilities, but based on their ability to charm, to look like a leader, pose like a leader. And it's interesting that the word charm, you think of, it's a serpent-like word, because what to charm someone means to use your psychological abilities, or with a woman it can mean to use her beauty. Man, it could be used as handsomeness or whatever, your personality, to charm someone or to charm the masses. And charm kind of connotates an almost magical deception. But people have no ability to perceive through the mask because they've been dumbed down intentionally. So The point here is that we are in an extremely dangerous, the most dangerous time in the history of the United States and mankind. I've said that a lot. I'm going to continue to say it a lot. As I shared with you, I had been saying that for about 2 years, speaking at conferences and TV and radio and stuff. And I'm finishing up probably one of the most powerful books I've ever written. And the title of the book came from this statement I kept finding myself using, which is, we are in the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. And that's the title of the new book. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that to sell a book, for crying out loud. I don't write any of my books just to sell a book. Because if I was going to write my books just to sell a book, I would write them using manipulative skills and using a formula that will guarantee you X amount of book sales. Now, by the grace of God, I've written 32 books, but by the grace of God, many of my books, or a fair number of my books, have been the best-selling books in the world in terms of Bible prophecy, especially the ones I've written with Troy Anderson, like The Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse. But we didn't write those books just methodically to make money and generate sales. We wrote with integrity. We wrote what we knew to be the truth. We wrote what our research uncovered, and said, this is truth. Truth has power. And if the people like it, we would love for them to like it. If they buy the book, of course, we would love for them to buy the books. But we didn't edit stuff out or choose topics on the basis of trying to sell books. And when you read the reviews of the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse, there's hundreds and hundreds of reviews. I forgot, it's just some astronomical amount of reviews on either book, and people are raving about the book. And and they're raving about it because of the truth, the research, and the integrity. And really, we have the ratings we have are basically 100%. The only reason they're not 100% is that when you write books that catch a lot of public attention and sell, you get people who know how to break through, let's say, the Amazon rating system. People who have never even bought the book, but they're organized. They're part of activist groups. And so they deliberately write negative reviews on your book or books because they're trying to take you down. And that happens to everybody who writes a book that deals with truth. So that's really the only people, period, who have said anything negative about either one of our books are those activists that don't like what we stand for. Anyone who approached the topic honestly, Christian or not Christian, gave us raving reviews because of the integrity of truth. And by the way, the book sales that I make and the books I've written with Troy, I don't keep the profits of those books. And I don't keep the profits of my other books. They all go into financing this ministry. They go directly into the ministry. I don't put them in any account. And the reason I'm telling you is that should dispel any skepticism. There's always some lunatic. Whenever you do something, you have airheaded enemies who accuse you of only being in it for the money. Well, how could that be if I'm not keeping the the profits of the book sales. How could that be if I'm not keeping the profits of the video? How could that be if I'm working, ridiculously long hours for this ministry? I mean, 14 hours a day would probably be normal for me, 7 days a week. My wife works now full-time in the ministry for free. So the point is, when people accuse you and they don't know what they're talking about, the idea that I'm doing this to make money is totally absurd. How could I be doing this for money if I'm not keeping profits from the books, which I'm not? In fact, I subsidize the ministry, and I'm not wealthy. Don't get this idea that Paul McGuire is a super wealthy guy. No, I'm just like you are. It's just I put my money where my mouth is. I believe in the message of this ministry that it has to go out, so I subsidize this ministry because there are incomes that I have generated before I even went full-time in the ministry. So that's just a point of reference for those of you that are loyal partners with me in this ministry. And I thank you for your donations and your prayers and your encouragement and your willingness to help us communicate. So back to this thing about the need for knowledge. This is a very hard concept for most people to grasp. And really, it's one of the main messages in my brand new book, The Greatest Battle. It's a very hard concept, and I was ministering on this at Paradise Mountain Church just a couple of days ago. And I pointed to the ceiling of the room, which I often do at conferences too. And I basically say the level of the ceiling, pretend the level of the ceiling is the limits of your human consciousness, the limits of your intelligence, the limits of your wisdom and knowledge. Okay? Now, I know nothing about construction, so what's the average? I'm looking at this studio that I'm in now. I don't know what how tall it is from the bottom to the ceiling. I really don't know, 15 feet, 16 feet, who knows, something like that. All right, maybe higher, I don't know. In any case, if we were to pretend, wherever you're listening to me, assuming you're in a home or whatever, how many feet high your ceiling is, pretend for a moment that is the limitation of your intelligence, your consciousness, and your wisdom and knowledge. And even though up above the ceiling, there is literally an infinite amount more knowledge and wisdom and consciousness to be gained, you neurologically have been programmed without you knowing it, and you've been scientifically dumbed down without you knowing it, to only be able to think at the level of the ceiling, which limits your knowledge, your intelligence, your abilities, your gifting, and everything else. You've been artificially limited. And I believe that the millennial generation, ultimately, I think they'll find their way, but they came out of the box with even a lower ceiling. And that's done as part of a master plan by what Aldous Huxley called the scientific dictatorship, what Brzezinski called the technocratic elite. And this comes back it goes all the way back to the philosophy of the Greek philosopher Plato, who believed that the legendary Atlantis existed, this legendary super civilization. And he believed that Atlantis, which perished apparently in the biblical flood, he believed that Atlantis was run, that the masses did not run Atlantis. Atlantis was run by 10 philosopher kings, or what Huxley would call the scientific dictatorship elite, or what Brzezinski would call the technocratic elite, people who have advanced knowledge in technology and a blend of technology and the supernatural, and they reconfigure reality. This elite that goes way back in time, this idea of the elite who consider themselves genetically superior, they consider themselves to be almost like gods. They believe they have the divine right. No, they don't believe in God, so they believe they have the genetic right to rule over the rest of us. And so they have designed, and this goes back to Plato, all the way up to modern times, especially in the 50s. They have designed the management of the United States and other nations to be a scientific dictatorship where the elite rule the masses. And so while they stupefy the masses, while they dumb down the masses, while they deliberately preoccupy the masses and distract the masses from thinking cognitively about their situation, they are busy micromanaging every one of our lives, micromanaging our nation and the world. And that truth there, and it is, let me tell you something, that truth that I just shared with you there is an airtight truth. There is so much overwhelming documentation from first-hand credible sources, such as these elite men published books available to the public, where they describe their plan for a scientific dictatorship, a technocratic elite, where they described their plans to take over the planet, the nations, the minds of people, and create a total control system through scientific mind control. They wrote book after book after book after book, and I've read the books. I've read the hundreds of academic articles from Ivy League schools, both in the United States and universities like Oxford and other schools, and MIT and Stanford Research Institute, etc., where this fact that I just told you is, again, overwhelmingly documented. So if you present this fact to someone and they try to dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, you shouldn't let them get away with it, because they have no clue what they're talking about. This is so established through the original writings, recordings, sometimes, in some cases, television interviews of these men. And it's the amount of men writing on this openly, exceeds thousands of men. So this is the truth about the reality that we live in. And Jesus Christ commanded his disciples, that's me and you, but he also commanded his ministers, his faithful watchmen, his prophets. Now, I don't want to get into the theological thing. I don't call myself a prophet, only for one reason. You have to have 100% accuracy, like Joel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and those prophets. And if you don't, in the Old Testament, you got stoned to death. So yes, I have prophetic giftings. And yes, the Lord uses me prophetically, as he does many people. But I will not categorize myself in this exclusive group of prophets like the Old Testament prophets, because I believe theologically they were in a far higher order, because it had to be 100% perfection, or the law demanded that they be stoned to death. Okay, so having said that, what I described to you is one of the most important truths that a person must know in developing an awareness, a consciousness, an understanding, an intelligence, and wisdom about the nature and composition of the world or the reality in which we live. What I just said is it's the bottom line truth. It doesn't matter whether people like it or not. I could care less. It's the bottom line truth as to the truth of the world that we live in, the nation that we live in, the reality that we live in. But because there's a ceiling on people's consciousness, like the ceiling in the room that you're in, overwhelmingly, the majority of people, including Christians, cannot get themselves to embrace that truth, no matter how much documentation and facts are presented to them. They have an irrational denial of true truth or the reality I just explained. It's like their heads, when they try to think, bang up against the ceiling, and they stay in their little compartmentalized world or their little shoebox of thought, and they can't transcend it. Meanwhile, in the elite's own words, they educate their children. They have been educated to think on a level that is far, far beyond the little shoebox mentality most people live in, or this artificial ceiling. The elite don't think and live underneath an artificial ceiling of consciousness. That because of who they mix with, because of the information that they have access to, and many other things, they live in a world where they have knowledge and intelligence that is so far beyond the understanding of the ordinary man or woman, because of who they mix with, because of they don't deny reality. They know the truth about reality. So, this is a simple concept that I'm communicating with you. But among your ordinary people, and especially among your average Christian, there is tremendous resistance and hostility to this truth. There's such a resistance and hostility to this truth, they'll call you a conspiracy theorist, a nut, they'll call you paranoid, and they'll call you everything. Because why? Why? Because they have been scientifically dumbed down, neurologically dumbed down. I mean, if you want to know the intelligence of the average American, just turn on TV. Most of it's geared for 12-year-olds. The sermons that I've been watching, I've been sampling them. They're sermons that are constructed for a third grade mentality. Well, okay, so you have church growth. And so you're attracting, or they could be making a lot of money, but you're attracting people with a third grade consciousness, a third grade mentality. Is that what Jesus said to do? Go into all the world and find the people with the least intelligence, with the least knowledge, and save them? Now, God isn't uppity. God's not discriminatory. You don't have to be smart to get into heaven. But there's really something very perverse and very wrong about an evangelicalism that has degraded its sermons to a third grade mindset. That was not the case when I got saved. It was like at least geared towards high school, so it was reachable to everyone. So, back to this fundamental truth about reality, which is that we live in a reality in a world where there exists a largely invisible elite that are using science and technology. They have deliberately dumbed down the masses so the masses can't think properly. And this is how they control the masses. As Aldous Huxley said, in a truly effective scientific dictatorship, men and women can be programmed to be slaves, and they will have absolutely no awareness that they're slaves. And so this is where we are. But when you try to set people free with this truth, they're resistant and they're angry because they're threatened. Remember, there's a psychological principle called the bias of normalcy. And what that basically means is that people will seek out whatever is normal to them, even if that normal is harmful. So because people and all their friends don't believe in this concept that they've been programmed, when indeed they have, that's too threatening a thought. So they will defy truth, defy documentation, defy using wisdom, and embrace the insanity due to the bias of normalcy about their reality. They would rather live in a false reality, constructed of lies, because that's what they're used to. That's their normal. It's like coming home. And the brain always seeks a certain kind of equilibrium where people want to come back home, no matter how dysfunctional that home is. That's why people who are raised in dysfunctional families subconsciously seek out dysfunctional partners, and so on and so forth. And so the ministers in America and other places around the world, the pastors, the seminaries, instead of setting them free intellectually and with their minds, they reinforce the illusion, the delusion, and they teach a theology that makes people comfortable in the delusion and the illusion, because that's easier. And so the church in America and around the world in the last 20 years has reinvented its theology, not to speak the truth, not to speak prophetically, not to speak truth to power, not to truly set people free. The church in America in the last, 30 years has reinvented itself to be the accommodator, to be the enabler, to be the promoter of an artificial reality with an artificial ceiling of consciousness and knowledge. The church, in fact, was infiltrated by change agents from the Marxist school, the Frankfurt Marxist school, beginning in the 1920s. They infiltrated with the funding, the massive funding of Rockefeller. They infiltrated the seminaries, the churches, the denominations, and that is why you see the rather absurd theology that's being preached from the pulpit that has nothing to do with the Bible. So the church has been programmed to abandon its function to shine the light, to be the salt, to be prophetic, to speak the truth, to set people free, to set the captives free. The church has abandoned that God-given mission and accepted the false mission of partnering with the world system, which essentially means partnering with Lucifer, because Lucifer is the temporary god of this world system. The church has denied its role from God and essentially is serving the world system, which really means serving the Luciferian world system, and functions primarily as an empowering agent in terms of Bible prophecy. The current church is on the fast track of driving Christians and their churches into the one world governmental system set up by the elite, the one world religion set up by the elite, and the one world economic system set up by the elite. Now that, by the way, is Mystery Babylon. The church, like the kings and the mighty men and the wealthy men on planet Earth talked about in the book of Revelation, God accuses them of fornicating with the great harlot, and the name of the great harlot is Mystery Babylon. What is Mystery Babylon? It's the world Luciferian system. And so the politicians, the globalist elite, the international bankers, the people in power and people of lesser power do not follow the ways of God. They have rejected the ways of God. They've rejected biblical truth. And in exchange for power, they have fornicated spiritually with the great harlot, whose name is Mystery Babylon. Now, the tragedy of tragedies is that the church, as Bible prophecy predicts, the church has divorced, to a large degree, the bridegroom, Jesus Christ. Because apostasy, which is the rejection of biblical truth, is really the rejection of Jesus Christ. So by embracing the great apostasy, the church rejects the truth of Jesus Christ. The church rejects Jesus as the bridegroom, therefore defiling itself as the bride of Christ. And the church itself is fornicating spiritually with the great harlot, Mystery Babylon. So all of this deception I described, whether the description that you heard from me based on psychology and consciousness and scientific mind control, that's all important. But what's even more important, as that system of deception and mind control integrates itself spiritually and in terms of Bible prophecy with the events of the book of Revelation and the events depicted in Bible prophecy about the great apostasy that would come upon believers in the last day. And what is the great apostasy? It's the great falling away from the truth that will come upon believers in the last days. And the church, like many power centers of society, is fornicating spiritually with the great harlot, Mystery Babylon, because it has become one with the emerging harlot church predicted in the book of Revelation, warned about by God in the book of Genesis. So you need to understand all this. You need to understand the integration of Mystery Babylon with the integration of the science of consciousness and awareness and the suppression of your intelligence and how that is attacking you. You need to understand this. This shouldn't be foreign to you. You're not supposed to be dumbed down like your brothers and sisters in Christ, because the truth sets you free. And this is why I've had and continue to have such a fire to write my new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. And the thing that is most disturbing to me, above all, is the fact that the vast majority of God's people, because they're so isolated from truth, they go to pastors that basically preach apostasy. They have no light in their lives. And as such, the average Christian is completely blind to the reality that right now they are in the midst of the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. And that's the central reason I wrote the book. as a means to wake up believers and to give you the facts and the ammunition to destroy this trance state, which is the apostasy, the great delusion that has fallen on God's people. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I have a fire in my belly and a passion about this. Because let me tell you something, and I write about this in the book also, there can be no revival. There will be no revival. There will be no move of God unless the truth in the areas that I've just discussed have set God's people free first. People who are programmed by mind control, which has its roots in ancient occultic sorcery and magic, they can't go into revival. There's such a heavy-duty spirit of deception upon them. They're in such heavy-duty apostasy. They've embraced what Bible prophecy talks about as the great delusion, that they're literally neutralized and paralyzed from receiving the revival that God so desperately desires for America and other nations. So until we set them free of the bondage that they're in with the truth, and that's why I wrote the book, because the Lord showed me that, Paul, that I want a revival. There's a prophetic destiny for the United States of America and other nations. But that destiny cannot be released as long as my people are listening to false teachers, false prophets, false doctrine. So that's why I wrote The Greatest Battle. And you can order your copy now as a pre-order, which means you get it before the general public. And if you pre-order it now, you not only get a financial discount on the book, you get it rushed to you before the general public gets it. And there was one other thing, and I forgot what it was. You get a discount on the book. Oh, yes, and then you get an autographed copy of the book. So you get an autographed copy of the book. You get your copy mailed to you before it's released to the general public, and you get a discount financially on the book. And all you got to do is go to paulmcguire.us and pre-order your copy now. And you should pre-order, because I expect that the response in this is going to be overwhelming. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. You can pre-order and get more information by going to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Spread this program far and wide. There's truth here. And we'll be back in just a second to talk about some more things that are evidence of the fact that God's people and the human race itself is under an all-out attack from not only Lucifer, but the men and women who follow Lucifer. We'll be back in just a second. You are listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Before we continue on basic facts and realities about how you're under attack, and you are under attack from a diverse variety of means. You're under attack in terms of your health, the food supply, genetically modified organisms, 5G cell phone technology, EMF waves. That's the beginning. You are under attack, and you have to fight back. I'm talking about peacefully in a law-abiding manner. If you're going to go with the flow and just not use your brain and be passive, because that's what the scientific mind control likes, dumbed down people because they're compliant, they don't question, and they're passive. That's your typical Christian. And people are dying and getting older and getting diseases in epidemic proportions, and it's not the will of God, by the way. But my people perish for lack of wisdom, for lack of a vision. And that's what we're trying to do here at Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Mountain Truth, is to effectively reach as many people as possible in the United States and around the world with the truth, while the doors are open for us to do that. And we're in the business of setting people free, first by leading them to Christ and helping them to become born again and teaching them the Word of God, but also in terms of how to apply the truth of my practical reality so that they can be set free. Okay, so in the Bible, beginning the book of Genesis, we read the first account of ancient Babylon and mystery Babylon at the time of the ancient Tower of Babel. And that was the source of the occultic mystery religions. So all the secret societies, all these occult secret societies that the elite of our world are secretly members of, the belief systems and the teachings of these secret societies go way back to ancient Babylon, and they were secretly smuggled from one kingdom to another, from one empire to another. They had to hide and operate in darkness, because if God's people found out, there were huge times in history where God's people were on the job, and they didn't allow occult secret societies to flourish. But today, people, even though these secret societies are a reality, many Christians, because they've been programmed, laugh and say it's a conspiracy theory. When Troy Anderson and I wrote the Babylon Code, one of the first hurdles we had was a high-level publisher, and he was one of the people on the committee that was going to decide whether or not to publish our book. And he challenged us. He said, well, how can you write a book on the Babylon Code and talk about the Illuminati? He said the Illuminati has ceased to exist, for 200 years ago, the Illuminati ceased to exist. And he firmly believed that, because that was taught in some dumbed-down secular or Christian university. Well, Troy and I do our homework. And we had impeccable research that the Illuminati did not cease to be an operating organization. And the Illuminati, in fact, continues to this day. Now, whether they go by the name Illuminati or not, maybe not. But the Illuminati, in no way, shape, or form, ceased to exist 200 years ago. So when we supplied him credible documentation and credible historical facts about the fact that the Illuminati is still in existence in our time, to his credit, because he was honest intellectually, he realized that he had been misinformed by reading our book. And he discovered, well, wow, these guys know what they're talking about. The Illuminati is real. You don't always encounter people with intellectual honesty, but this man did have intellectual honesty. So this publisher picked up our book enthusiastically. Okay, so Mystery Babylon. This is important, and I just want to touch on this. The world right now is racing to the culmination of Bible prophecy, where a one world government, one world religion, one world economic system is materializing before our very eyes. That's part of the UN Agenda 2030. And it will be secretly ruled by the elite. And then, of course, a world charismatic leader, the Antichrist, will emerge, and he will be the head of the global government. And the world will worship him. Such a heavy-duty spiritual deception will come upon the people of the earth that they will literally, many of them will renounce Jesus Christ as Lord, and they will worship the Antichrist is God. And the Antichrist, by the way, is indwelt by Satan. And the Antichrist will set himself up in the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, where the Jews will have rebuilt their temple and they will be conducting animal sacrifices. And the Antichrist, and this is called the abomination of desolation by Christ and the apostles, the Antichrist will set himself up in the rebuilt Jewish temple and sit on a throne in the rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem and demand that all the world worships him as God, because that's what he's wanted from the beginning. This whole revolution with Lucifer, a fallen angel, the whole revolution that Lucifer has been planning is devoted to this single objective. He wants to do a regime change. He wants to dethrone the true God. And he wants to install himself on the throne of the true God and take over God's position and to be God. He wants to be the new God. And through spiritual deception and supernatural energy, he has convinced many people in the highest places of our world now and historically, and he's convinced many people that Lucifer has convinced many people that he's going to be triumphant against Christ when Christ returns. He's going to win the battle. This world will be a Luciferian-run world. Now, remember, Lucifer has a big character flaw. It's called pride. And his pride is deluding him from seeing the actual truth. There is only going to be one winner when Jesus Christ returns at the second coming, along with the armies of heaven. Jesus Christ will defeat all the armies of the earth coming against him at the Battle of Armageddon. He will defeat all the fallen angels. He will defeat Lucifer, the false prophet, and the Antichrist, and he will send them into that cosmic called the abyss. And Jesus Christ will establish himself as the rightful ruler of planet Earth and rule planet Earth from its brand new capital, Jerusalem, for 1,000-year millennium. So, before that happens, this world system, which has from the beginning been a satanic world system, and this illusion and spiritual deception that's all around us, is essentially a Luciferian supernatural deception. And Mystery Babylon is this world of satanic sorcery, satanic delusion, satanic mind control, a satanic artificial reality. And it's what drives this present world system temporarily. So let me read you something that you may find interesting. In Revelation 17, it talks about Mystery Babylon. So I'm going to start here in verse 4. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written. And remember, back in Roman times, the prostitutes had a name written on their foreheads. So it says, and on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. Now, why the woman was drunk with the blood of saints and the blood of martyrs is because all those that are serving Satan by serving Mystery Babylon will kill and bitterly persecute all true believers in Christ. And there will be a large number of believers in Jesus Christ that will die during the tribulation period. And they are going to be in heaven under the throne room of God, and they'll be crying out to God day and night. They'll be crying out, these martyred believers, God to send Jesus Christ to avenge them, to avenge their blood, and take out and bring down the satanic system in Mystery Babylon. So it talks about the beast that you saw was and is not, will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. So the key thing here is that those that follow the beast, that follow Mystery Babylon, this is very serious. Their names are not written in the book of life. And as such, they cannot get entrance into heaven. They will stand before the great white throne of judgment and be sentenced into the cosmic prison called hell for all eternity. So, the system of Babylon in Revelation 18, I'll just read a verse or two. It says, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury." So you see, the businessmen, the power leaders, etc., the massive cash flow, the 1%, the globalist elite, the whole thing that makes this world system run is this satanic world system called Mystery Babylon. Now, let me read you another verse, and that's in Revelation 18 also, where it says, "The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, the mighty men of the earth. For by your sorcery all the nations were deceived." So you see, Lucifer elevates and gives enormous wealth to men and women who will serve him. That's what this is talking about. But it's all based, the economic system, the governmental, the religious system, is all based on Mystery Babylon and satanic rulership. So that's why it says, "For your merchants were the great men of the earth. For by your sorcery all the nations were deceived." Now, I want to nail this and not play games here. The Bible repeatedly talks about Lucifer and his deception and his lies and his mind control and his ability to control minds. The entire satanic system known as Babylon is built on very powerful spiritual deception, or, as it's called, sorcery. Sorcery and spiritual deception are the same. It's using supernatural power, occultic power, to control people, like through mind control, like they're in a trance, like a witchcraft spell. So when I talk to you in detail and try to teach you the basics of what is commonly known as scientific mind control, social engineering, persuasion, propaganda, brainwashing, hypnotic states, etc., powerful drugs like LSD, MK Ultra, etc. The reason I'm talking to you about that is if you read the Bible carefully and apply it to the reality that we're in, it's unmistakable that those so-called technological devices of mind control are a complete integration with the kind of sorcery and occult power that's talked about in the book of Revelation. remember that ancient super civilizations, they did not separate advanced mathematics, science, technology, magic, and sorcery. They didn't look at those things as separate spheres. The advanced and highly super genius rulers of the ancient super civilizations didn't divide like we do, and our division is an error, by the way. They didn't divide concepts like scientific mind control, MK Ultra, hypnotic states, social engineering. They did not divide that from things like magic and sorcery. They had technology and science back in the super civilizations. It was one body of thought, as it should be today. You see, the seminaries, the pastors, should be teaching God's people the truth, which is that they are being subjected to scientific mind control. But the religious leaders babble. I'm talking about babbling because they don't know what they're talking about. They say stuff like, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory," or "We're only called to preach the gospel." And so we're not called to teach about scientific mind control and programming people in hypnosis. We're only called to preach the gospel. I mean, really, man, that is like that is the words of a fool, because it's not biblical. The Bible commands us to set people free. Jesus Christ came to set the captives free. First and foremost, the truth of salvation and being born again. But liberating people so that they can be all that God created them to be means you have to understand what the Bible teaches, beginning in ancient Babylon and in Egypt. You know, the Pharaoh and the king of Babylon were surrounded by heavy-duty occultic magicians, clairvoyants, false prophets, sorcerers, who actually delivered and performed real supernatural authenticated acts, because if they didn't, they were killed. And so that's knowledge of the occult, but it's knowledge. And that knowledge, if you read the Bible properly, which these people don't, that flows right in. Ancient sorcery, ancient magic, ancient clairvoyance, ancient psychic power flows right into the realms of neuroscience, of scientific mind control, of hypnotic programming, altered states of consciousness, and things like EMF, electromagnetic frequency fields, 5G technology, etc. You go, Paul, I don't know what you're talking about. I understand that you don't know what I'm talking about, because this is new material probably for most of you, because nobody's shared this with you. But I'm telling you something. I have been doing the deepest dive of research in my life as I'm finishing up my brand new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. And this book is sheer dynamite. It will blow the chains of oppression off you with the force of the Holy Spirit. And it's documented, it's scientific, and it's biblical, and it deals with Bible prophecy. I'm telling you, you shouldn't wait. You need to get a copy now and pre-order it. And my passion and sense of urgency in communicating this with you is not driven by money, as I explained earlier. It's driven by a raw passion to see you delivered and have the knowledge and power you need to defeat the adversary. I was aware of all these topics, but when I call it a deep dive, I went further than I ever went before. And let me file you a couple of things in the book that totally connect to what I just said and prove it. Our nation, since the 1940s, and Russia was on it in the 1930s. Russia took the inventions and technology of Nikola Tesla seriously, and they have developed an arsenal. You don't hear about it in America, but there was a major newspaper, a British newspaper, and a scientific report that came out talking about Russia's new psychic army, telepathic army, where they've trained certain super soldiers to use psychic power, telepathic power on the battlefield. It's science, okay? Even though they're using the word psychic, it's science. And then America has been doing secret experiments in this area also. Now, America has been doing secret scientific experiments with the CIA, with the military. Going back to the 1940s, we have been doing secret psychic experiments with mental telepathy, psychic powers, and things called remote viewing, which I discuss and prove to you in my book in detail, in the book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind. I talk about a guy who there was several key high-level scientists that were the heads of the remote viewing program. Russia had a remote viewing program too. And they put these guys to the test. And these guys were able to access, changing their brain waves. They could locate where people were hidden, who were kidnapped. They could locate secret military bases. They could look into people's minds and learn stuff about them with telepathic ability. And they used psychic warfare, which they developed into a science, and they integrated it with technology, and things that you think are supernatural and are not doable are secret psychic weapons by our military and some of the weapons in the world. And I read in detail the Freedom of Information Act files from the CIA, from the FBI. I read the Freedom of Information Act files, and some of these files have just been released about the reality and the fact that these things work, about the reality of things like remote viewing. Remote viewing is when they train someone with psychic abilities to see where an enemy is located, or what an enemy is going to do, or if this army is going to invade or not. It's a telepathic weapon, and they're serious about it, and they've developed it. They have people who sit in rooms, and through the utilization of psychic power, they can cause people to get sick. They can plant thoughts in their mind. In other words, they can exercise mind control. It just can move from one part of the planet to the other through psychic power, and they can kill people with psychic power. Not to mention other stuff. People have been able to read documents that are locked away in safes, make predictions about. One particular scientist made an accurate prediction about 30 years ago, and he made a scientific prediction about what would happen when our spacecraft visited Jupiter and began to take pictures. He, by using psychic power, saw into the future, and he described in writing exactly what our photographs of Jupiter have shown to us. He described exactly what we would see, and he'd never been to Jupiter, and we have never been to Jupiter. And he sent sealed documents to very high-level scientists all around the world and in the United States, and then told them, after we sent a spacecraft to Jupiter and photographed Jupiter, the descriptions of what we saw on Jupiter matched his psychic ability to tap into it decades before we went there. And the proof was that all kinds of people who were heavy-duty scientists had the sealed documents proving that he made the prediction before he did. And that's just part of it. Now, I want to tell you some other things briefly, but it's important. Once again, this is vitally important for you to know. And I want you to know it. Because it'll save your life. Their knowledge is accelerating in the last days. God's people are left behind, or their knowledge accelerates. The science of electromagnetic frequencies, EMF waves or brain waves, are critical to understanding many things. The scientific truth that our beings, our consciousness, our mind, our bodies are essentially a combination of electro and magnetic frequencies uniquely vibrating. So who you are as a being is not flesh and blood and eyes and whatever. That's like for lack of words, a virtual reality projection that's being energized by what you really are is an electromagnetic vibrational field. Now, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty where, it's no longer acceptable to be a dumb Christian. We're supposed to be the head and not the tail. I mean, I don't understand these pastors. They're teaching their people to be complacent tails, and God said we're to be the head, not the tail. Okay. Electromagnetic frequencies. Electromagnetic frequencies are one of the most powerful technologies that can communicate disease, death to a human mind body. But the right electromagnetic frequencies are among the most powerful technology to cure disease, to produce anti-aging, and to produce longevity. In other words, it's a super healer or a super killer, depending upon which frequencies you're using. The elite, the scientific elite in America and around the world have known this since the 40s. They've covered it up. 5G, the broadcast from your TV, the broadcast from radio, the broadcast from the electrical current in your house is all either what's called EMF frequencies or ELF frequencies. Depending on the specific frequency, good or bad things can happen. So, 5G is dangerous. 5G is a killer. 5G is the rollout of new cell phone technology. It'll have a different tower, and to put it in layman's language, the 5G technology is 100 times more powerful than the 4G cell phone technology that you're currently using and I'm currently using. The new 5G is going to be 100 times more powerful, but it has a multiplying effect that makes it even more powerful. Now here's the problem. The frequency range that 5G cell phone technology and 5G wireless technology operates in is the exact same frequency range, or in the neighborhood of the exact same frequency range, by which directed energy beam weapons use. And there's two kinds, basically, of directed energy beam weapons. There's the non-lethal directed energy beam weapon, and then there's the lethal or deadly directed energy beam weapon. when the military or the police are trying to disperse a crowd that's going crazy, they can fire and have fired a non-lethal directed energy beam at the crowd. It's invisible. In a nanosecond, people feel like their bodies are on fire, like they're being burned up, and they run as fast as they can. They disperse as fast as they can. Effective crowd control. Theoretically, nobody gets hurt. But if you turn up the dial, which you can do, on a non-lethal directed energy beam weapon, you now have a deadly, lethal directed energy beam weapon. And so you can aim at people and cause mental confusion and paralysis. But if you hit them with enough power, that directed energy beam weapon will literally snap the back of your neck. The skeletal framework will separate between your neck and head, and you'll die instantly. And it is, this directed energy beam weapon can disintegrate metal, buildings. It's not a laser weapon, but think of it in terms of that. It's a science fiction weapon, but it's now fully operational. Okay, so 5G technology operates in the same general range of frequency that the directed energy beams operate in. So, we already have massive studies about health effects, negative health effects, diseases from 4G technology. 5G technology, because of its power and because of its frequency range, is going to produce an entire spectrum of diseases, mental health problems, lack of cognitive abilities, diseases, confusion. I mean, you can read the medical reports. I talk about some of the data in my book. So, what do you have here? What am I getting at? What I'm getting at is there's an entirely new world that has been researched thoroughly by science since the 40s that is all about EMF waves, which happen to be brain waves. It's all about ELF, EMF waves, 5G transmission, 100 times more powerful than cell phones. And notice that the most powerful weapons in the world right now are directed energy beam weapons that operate within the same frequency range as 5G cell towers. Notice that there's a science to psychic power. When these military-trained scientific psychics can kill people at a distance, read their minds at a distance, notice that they train themselves through meditation and biofeedback. They train their brains to operate on very specific electromagnetic frequencies. And when their brain is entrained to specific electromagnetic frequencies, they're able to release and access enormous psychic power that can do all kinds of things. So I just touched the tip of the iceberg. The most compelling revolution that's about to occur in science, and they're going to try to hide it from you, is that, and this goes back, by the way, the biggest breakthrough goes back to Nikola Tesla and his technology. Almost 100 years ago or more. The technology originally developed by Tesla, which was suppressed because he would have made gasoline fossil fuel, petroleum, useless, worthless, because Tesla developed an electromagnetic frequency called scalar wave technology that can retrieve an infinite amount of energy out of another dimension. Tesla developed technology that pulls an infinite amount of energy from another dimension, and we would have no power shortages whatsoever. So with all these environmentalists like the UN and stuff, how come Tesla's technology is not fully operational now? I'll tell you why. Because the people of this world own the petroleum companies, own the fuel companies, and they have a monopoly. They don't care if it's killing people, if it's causing wars, if it's causing climate change, or anything else. They care about money, period. The government knows this, but they own the government. They control the government. Rockefeller built his fortune, that family, on oil money. And they control the world, along with Rothschild and the others. So they're not about, even though we have the solution to climate change, even though we have the solution to, all the baloney about having to ride bicycles in small houses and, you conserve on your electrical power and all these things the UN and the brainwashing mechanism of the public schools and the politicians indoctrinate people with is total rubbish. The entire energy crisis, environmental problems, the running out of fuels, it's all garbage. It's all a lie. Tesla technology developed a science which pulls an infinite amount of energy to use for anything you want. There's an infinite supply because you're pulling it out of another dimension, which is sometimes called ether. And it's very, very, very inexpensive to do. You can start pulling energy out of another dimension with something the size of a shoebox. So this whole energy shortage and all the lies that go along with it, like we got to move into tiny apartments, we can't have land, we can't use air conditioning, we need to ration this, ration that. All that is lies designed to herd the people into the inner city so they'll drive bicycles, and it's just a pretense. It's just a mind control sucker punch to keep the people under the thumb of the globalist elite. And the United Nations and Agenda 2030 is a complete fraud. It's a mechanism of control by the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the globalist elite, because the whole thing is based on a lie. We have a solution. We have had a solution for over 100 years to the energy problem. It's Tesla technology. The Russians are using it right now, or scalar wave technology. And when it comes to healing, we have Big Pharma. Big Pharma doesn't want you to know there's an alternative to pills, 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 and then death. There's a solution. The most powerful healing technologies in the world today that can reverse aging, supercharge your immune system, and literally get rid of any disease that you have doesn't come from pills and chemicals. You can be cured through scalar wave technology. Okay? And sometimes it's weaponized. It's called energetics by the Russians. But scalar wave technology produces what's called a bioenergetic field. Remember, every human being is literally a projection of electromagnetic energy. And depending upon the frequency of electromagnetic energy that you're generating, you're either going to be diseased or you're going to be healed. So if every time there have been numerous scientists and inventors, 5 or 6 really famous ones, who actually invented technology that would expose their sick patients to the healing waves of variations of Tesla's scalar wave technology. People like Rife, and the Rife frequencies and others. And people were like, it was like magic. They were getting healed from all these diseases by exposing their bodies and minds to healing electromagnetic frequencies. And you see where we're going here? We're in the battle, man. I'm telling you this with everything in me. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. This is why I wrote The Greatest Battle for the Hearts of Mankind in the History of the World. God has not deserted his people at this time. He wants us to have a basic understanding about how to acquire, use, and build these technologies because it's simple to do. And you don't have to be, you can protect yourself from the assault of 5G. And it is an assault because it destroys your DNA. But the proper frequencies heal your DNA. So, I just touched on part of the book, and I urge you with everything in me to be immediately, because I want you to get a copy before the general public and take advantage of the financial discount, an autographed copy, but most importantly, I want you to have this knowledge and to be able to use it. God does not want his people to be sick, broke, beaten down, subjected to mind control. There are both spiritual tools and they're both technological tools that God has placed in our hand. And we need to wake up, stop being, stupidity should not be a characteristic of Christians. We should be known as the head and tail. We should be known for our wisdom. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.